Thus, France and Britain are leading the NATO condemnation of Donald Trump's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. It's now underway. The US military confirming this early this Monday. No further details have been provided. Keir Starmer, chief of those leading the criticism, it follows Donald Trump's threat to impose a stoppage of ships in the wake of the failed peace talks at the weekend between the US and Iran. Trump this Monday says 34 vessels went through the strait in the past 24 hours. James Vassner has this.
What was once a threat has now turned into a reality. Donald Trump's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, aimed specifically at ships travelling to and from Iranian ports, came into effect on Monday in an attempt to further isolate Tehran from the rest of the world.
I didn't like seeing boats come out if they were doing business with Iran, but if they weren't, no boats came out. So now Iran is doing absolutely no business, and we're going to keep it that way very easily. Don't forget, their Navy is gone, their Air Force is gone, their anti-aircraft is gone, their radar is gone, and their leaders are gone.
The US president warned Iran that he would eliminate any vessels, known as fast attack ships, that came close to the blockade. Earlier in the day, a news anchor read out the following statement from Iran's military.
If the security of the ports of the Islamic Republic of Iran in the waters of the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman is threatened, no port in the Persian Gulf or in the Sea of Oman will remain safe.
Nations across the world had warned against blocking the strait, with China insisting that it would go against countries' interests, while the United Nations Maritime Agency stressed that all boats are legally permitted to pass.
In the law of the sea conventions, international straits for international navigation all the countries need to respect the right of innocent passage and the right to freedom of navigation, and there's no legal mechanisms to introduce any type of tolls, regardless of the country that is announcing a toll.
The move comes following the breakdown of talks between the US and Iran in Islamabad. The start of the blockade has raised fears that it could jeopardise the 15-day ceasefire that's currently in place.
Let's get more on this and bring in Philip Ingram, journalist and former officer of British intelligence, joining us live. Philip, great to have you with us here on France 24. How are you interpreting this situation, the move by Trump?
I think part of this is Trump's usual noisy rhetoric. He hasn't seemed to have thought through the words that he's putting out into public. And to try and implement a blockade from a military perspective is very difficult indeed, and is in danger of contravening the laws of the sea, as we heard explained, and B, inflaming a number of other countries around the world, not least of which China.
I'm wondering, in some way, is this really playing into Iran's hands?
It is and it isn't. Donald Trump is talking to someone in Iran, and there are other people making decisions. Trump turns around and says that he has eliminated the leadership. Well, there's clearly a leadership making a decision to condemn America for what it's doing and to continue to try and impose tolls on ships that are going through the revamped sea routes, because it seems as if Iran has mined the main sea routes that go through Omani territorial waters. So we've got a game of brinkmanship at the moment, and it'll be interesting to see who breaks first. Donald Trump, I think, is not reading the Iranians well, and is going to have to return to some form of military action to try and force them back to the negotiating table.
It's worth reminding people, Philip, I think, that before February the 28th, when Israel and the US decided to bomb Iran, as talks were still ongoing, there were no problems for ships going in and out of the Persian Gulf, no problems on the Strait of Hormuz. The mines that you just spoken about weren't there at that time. This has all happened, in a sense, as a consequence of what happened on February the 28th and afterwards.
It has, but we have to put this into wider context. The Iranians have been attacking shipping going through the Strait of Hormuz from time to time over the last decade, if not longer. In the 12 months before Israel and the United States attacked Iran, the United States interests had been directly attacked by the Iranians or by the Iranian proxies, and we call them proxies, but they're actually direct arms of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, the Quds Force in particular. We're talking the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, and other groups across Iraq. They've been attacked 140 times and the US hadn't responded. And we just think about that. Would a boxer stand in a boxing ring and allow him or herself to be hit 140 times before taking response? So there was going to be an international response at some stage. Donald Trump chose it as now. In military planning terms, I was always aware whenever I was doing my military planning that the Straits of Hormuz was the biggest area that Iran could exert influence, and closing that would be one of the first things that they would do. So why he's allowed that to happen, I really don't know.
And the reaction of Europe, Britain, France, for instance, clearly against what is happening, it's basically shining an even brighter light on the differences between those who once upon a time, and perhaps nominally still are allies.
Well, yes, and I think the reactions of a lot of our European leaders, and I include the UK within that, have been naive, to say the least, because our leaders have been focused very much on their domestic audience and domestic politics, whereas they could have provided a level of political support to Donald Trump and kept themselves at the table to be able to whisper in his ear, acting as his conscience. But now we've seemed to have pushed him out completely. He's not going to listen, and therefore we've lost any influence as to what's going to happen. Donald Trump never needed European nations to come in and help militarily. He's got more than enough military might himself, but it's that political support or that lack of political condemnation. Our European leaders have decided to condemn rather than remain silent, and that is not a good tactic when you're dealing with Donald Trump.
There are many things about Trump's approach and the Trump administration's approach that don't seem to add up. And you mentioned there that the US had more than enough firepower to do this by themselves, yet there has been the call for help from NATO allies such as Britain, France, or whatever. Why would he do that? Strategically, is that an error on Trump's part?
I don't think it's an error, and I don't think he's calling for military help. I think he's calling for political support, and it's that political support that's really important. And we have been helping, and this is where a lot of our leaders are getting it wrong. In the run up to the American attacks on Iran, the Americans were using their bases across different NATO countries. During the attacks and after the attacks, American capabilities were using those bases to carry out the battle damage assessment, to carry out the logistics support and everything else. We've got troops, we've got our air forces deployed across the Middle East supporting our Middle East partners, but that's providing support for the Americans and protection for them to go off and do what they're doing. So I think our political leaders across Europe are deliberately choosing their words to try and suggest that they're not doing something that in reality they are doing. And that is where I think Donald Trump is getting very riled at it.
What happens next? You mentioned earlier in the interview that the next move, certainly if Trump wants to finish the job, as he often talks about doing, well, he talks about having won already, but clearly that isn't the case. Is it more bombing? Is a ground invasion going to happen? What do you think happens next?
I don't think Donald Trump has read the psychology of the Iranians well at all, which surprises me because his military commanders, I know it very well indeed. The Iranians are not going to give in, and therefore Donald Trump either has to continue the blockade, the impact of that, and deal with the impact that that's going to have on the global economies. There'll be more and more pressure on him from a domestic perspective and an international perspective. Or he then has to work on the principle that there's still a level of military leadership and political leadership in Iran that is blocking any further negotiations, and go back to removing that. And that will mean going back to a bombing campaign.
Philip Ingram, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thanks for your analysis. Greatly appreciated. Philip Ingram, journalist, former officer of British intelligence. Thanks again, sir, for joining us.